Execute, not pardon. Where should the comma be put? The shocking reality behind school shootings. In our times, school shootings have become a festering wound on the body of society, bleeding out the lives of our children and provoking public outrage and shock. As shown in the graphs provided in the Impact documentary, the number of school shootings has been growing exponentially. A horrifying trend, isn't it? However, there is an explanation for this phenomenon. At first glance, school shootings seem to be the result of a shooter's personal choice, which naturally provokes public outrage, protests, and extensive media coverage. Yet, are school shootings really spontaneous events, or are they carefully and deliberately planned terrorist acts? According to the Impact documentary, the answer lies in identifying the ultimate beneficiaries, those behind the global anti-cult movement. Quote from the Impact documentary.
School shootings have been a phenomenon of the past 30 years. Just as many years ago, the hidden force behind global anti-cultism began to regain its strength. It was then that they founded the ideological center of the modern network of anti-cult groups, and it was then that they began to consolidate their positions and spread their destructive influence massively in democratic countries around the world. And this is not just a coincidence, that's a fact.
Indicators of school shooting preparation. There are several signs that can help identify the intentional remote preparation of a school shooting by third parties. These indicators can be analyzed both retrospectively, that is, covering a period of several years before school shooting incidents actually occurred, and in real time to identify active preparations for school shootings in a specific region, an increase in street murders, as well as family member murders, committed by teenagers in the examined region, unsuccessful school shooting attempts in a particular school or schools within a district, a rise in bipolar disorder rates among youth in the examined region, an increase in media publications and popular social media posts in the studied area, containing manipulative subliminal implants using the puzzle coding method. In the case of executed school shootings, an increase in media publications containing manipulative implants using the puzzle coding method made after the crime, increase in street murders and family member murders committed by teenagers in an examined region, unsuccessful school shooting attempts. There is a side effect that arises due to an overlap of crosswaves from informational coding when the puzzle coding method described in the Impact documentary is employed. Information waves keep overlapping until a school shooting event planned by anti-cultists occurs at a specific school, and until the subconscious mind of one of the teenagers aligns all the puzzle pieces properly. This coding process can take several years. However, as a result of the prolonged and multi-layered process of informational coding, the preparatory and targeting waves begin to affect the subconsciousness of many children. Therefore, in a region targeted by anti-cultists, there's a sharp increase in street murders, family member murders, or attempted but unfinished murders among teenagers. Why do teenagers commit more murders? The reason lies within the puzzle coding method itself. When a teenager's mind has all the puzzle pieces of informational coding in place, this teenager plans a school shooting without hesitation and eventually carries it out. Often, before committing a mass murder at school, a shooter kills his parents or other relatives, or people on the street. If, for certain reasons, a potential shooter lacks several information code pieces to complete the puzzle picture, while a subconscious command to commit the crime is already present, and bipolar affective disorder has already developed, the teenager, on the one hand, gets activated, but on the other hand, stops at the first stage of school shooting and commits a lesser crime. Typically, this involves killing one or a few people such as family members or random people on the street. Thereafter, the teenager experiences a mission complete effect, and the bipolar disorder disappears. This may also result in feelings of panic and fear due to the crime committed. For this very reason, it often happens that in the years preceding a school shooting at a specific school, there were cases of attempted but unsuccessful school acts of terrorism. In those incidents, students brought weapons to school, but stopped due to internal hesitation, or were prematurely spotted and stopped by security or witnesses. After experiencing inner stress and fear of impending problems, the bipolar disorder would disappear, and the teenager would no longer attempt the crime. The current statistics of attempted but unexecuted school shootings are staggering, far exceeding the number of actual school shootings. According to the UN, worldwide over 176,000 homicides occur among youth 15 to 29 years of age each year, greatly outnumbering the annual number of children killed in school shootings. Street murders of innocent people committed by teenagers are often justified by the presence of street gangs and their brutal rules. It is assumed that joining a gang requires a teenager to go through initiation by committing murder. However, analyzing the statistics reveals that the rise in interest in street gangs coincides with the onset of anti-cult activities. Bipolar disorders. One of significant precursors to school shootings is the rise in cases of bipolar affective disorders among school children and students. As mentioned in the Impact documentary,
one indicator that students at a particular educational institution have been subjected to hidden external subconscious manipulation is an increase in cases of bipolar affective disorder among them. What's the connection here? Since the initial waves of information coding have a wide radius of impact, certain embeds, parts of the program for mass shootings, infiltrate the subconscious of all affected individuals. What happens to a person in this case? Hidden directives start acting in their subconscious, conflicting with their conscious goals and aspirations. As a result, internal conflict and resistance emerge within the individual. This conflict, triggered by the implanting of foreign elements into the subconscious, eventually manifests as bipolar disorder. Representatives of anti-cultism cannot avoid provoking such conditions when they initiate preparatory waves of coding for school shootings, because this forms the foundation for further imposition of other waves, ultimately launching the program.
Interestingly, though, statistics show a sharp increase in the number of bipolar affective disorder cases among youth, which completely coincides with the period of active development of global anti-cultism. The incidence of bipolar disorder in adolescents and young adults has been increasing every year since 1990. Whether in 1990 or 2019, it is important to note that the number of incidences peaked at ages 15 to 19 years, followed by ages 10 to 14 years. Some experts attribute cases of school shootings to problems associated with adolescence. However, it is worth noting that school shootings are committed by children in certain countries where all signs of active anti-cult activities have been observed. Subliminal implants transmitted through mass media. Have you ever wondered why countries with high crime rates and widespread gun ownership don't experience mass shootings in schools? Why don't teenagers commit murders in the streets despite having access to weapons at home? This paradox can be explained by the absence of media-driven informational coding in those countries. According to statistics, there are countries where school shootings have never occurred, or they are extremely rare, with only one or a few incidents throughout the country's history. Careful analysis of media coverage of such crimes in those countries reveals an interesting pattern. The reports are composed quite dryly, without details of the crime and without extensive information about the shooter, often omitting even their name and photo. These publications completely lack any glorification of the criminal. They briefly outline the crime and the actions taken by law enforcement. Such news about random shootings is described without excessive sensationalism, is not popularized, and is not repeated over time. However, if we analyze the informational landscape in countries where the problem of school shootings is hyperactive, we see a completely different picture. It turns out that years before a school shooting occurs, the media field of the region where the school is located, gradually and purposefully, have been filled with publications in mass media and social networks containing informational coding implants, words or numbers that influence subconsciousness in a specific way. We also find publications that resurface stories of previous shooters, engage in their covert or overt glorification, and provide information about past attacks, including criticism of authorities and police, as well as mentions of books and films created using manipulative subconscious programming techniques. Through such publications, preparatory, targeting, and activating waves of informational coding are being launched, as was described in detail in the Impact documentary. These kinds of publications are characterized by their excessive detailing of the events and the helplessness of law enforcement before the perpetrators. They contain detailed descriptions of shooters' actions, including the dates and timing of every step they took from planning to execution of the attack. There are thorough descriptions of the weapons and area maps used by a shooter to commit the crime, as well as quoting and highlighting of his personal notes, containing keywords that, like a computer virus, affected the subconsciousness of a previous shooter, and activate the next potential murderer. All these publications resemble a detailed instruction manual for future potential shooters rather than simple, informative news. A mandatory emphasis in those publications is always on key phrases, ultimately showing teenagers that by committing a crime, they will become renowned and gain worldwide fame. There may be quotes by previous shooters who were proud of becoming big names in the news, gaining major media attention, or excerpts from their personal correspondence with friends where shortly before the crime a shooter suggested becoming famous in the media. Additionally, there may be timely published examples of popular individuals who, like bright stars in contrast to the large gray mass of people, managed to achieve great success and become famous throughout the world all by themselves. At this moment, due to an overlap of informational waves of puzzle coding, a potential shooter who possesses huge unimplemented inner ambitions and lacks real opportunities to gain fame, understands that he can only become famous by committing an armed terrorist attack at school. Analyzing the publications that have long been carrying out informational coding, we reveal another aspect. They emphasize creating two internal antagonistic personalities within an individual, a hero and his antipode. It is implanted into a teenager's subconsciousness that he can fulfill himself, become a hero, godlike, or an eternally living demigod. But in order to achieve this, he must take someone's life. Hence, if the potential shooter is confident enough, a clear split occurs within him, dominated by the inner god capable of determining other people's fates. Therefore, in the personal notes of shooters, one can often find phrases indicating they consider themselves gods or godlike. A striking example is a note by one of the shooters who carried out the Columbine massacre. The consequences of such publications are alarming. As long as journalists recruited by anti-cultists continue to publish these kinds of articles, children are undoubtedly at risk. Additionally, in some cases, there are teachers and lecturers who consciously initiate waves of informational coding during their classes and lectures. An example of this is given in the Impact documentary, where the shooting at Charles University in Prague is discussed. The presence of such teachers and lecturers in educational institutions is frightening, as they are essentially manipulators who lack empathy and have hidden motives and direct connections with representatives of anti-cultism. Publications in mass media, posts in social networks, and lectures in educational institutions are not the only problem. Today, there are purposefully created videos and whole movies that contain hidden coding at the level of human subconsciousness. Subconscious audiovisual coding. Just imagine. Today, there are movies that use visual and auditory stimuli to subtly and, at first glance, imperceptibly manipulate the subconscious mind, altering a person's worldview and subsequent behavior. When analyzing the structure of such films, even if you're not a specialist, it becomes obvious that every scene is meticulously crafted by professionals in the field of influencing unconscious mental processes. They employ complex techniques of neuro-linguistic programming and sensory synthesis aimed at one's subconscious perception. To recognize this type of manipulative subconscious programming, pay attention to the following details. 1. Background footage. During highly emotional scenes in such movies, when viewers' consciousness is entirely focused on intense experiences like tough dialogues, conflicts, intimate scenes, or acts of violence, another video footage is deliberately overlaid in a small window in the background of the main video. Despite being seemingly chaotic and unrelated to the main plot, the background footage contains hidden neurocognitive triggers and subconscious commands. Those triggers and commands activate under certain external circumstances, leading to implementation of an implanted program in the future. Subconsciousness responds to them regardless of a person's will and desire. As a rule, this involves alternating and combining in a varying sequence of small fragments of videos or images, such as violent, animalistic, life-affirming, erotic, historical, naturalistic, ethnic, and others. In the background plot, diverse combinations of this kind of footage serve as specific psychovisual stimuli. Each of those images activates certain brain regions and evokes various physiological and psychological reactions. For instance, an image suggesting a potential threat can simultaneously activate multiple brain regions related to threat perception and emotional responses. Specifically, The amygdala responds to fear and anxiety reactions. The visual cortex processes visual information, while the prefrontal cortex is involved in reflection and planning. The hippocampus connects to memory and recollections, whereas motor cortex areas prepare the body for action. In addition, the posterior cingulate cortex ensures emotional evaluation, while the insular cortex is involved in perceiving internal states of the body. Every image may be figuratively compared to an alphabet letter activating specific brain regions and triggering particular reactions. Various combinations of those letters form entire words and sentences with subconscious command messages. Hence, skilled manipulators well versed in the subtleties of subconscious reactions play those images like the piano. Combined with the overall context of a film, a whole musical composition is thus created, the leitmotif of which is a command to a viewer to commit a terrorist act, and in some cases, to commit suicide in the end. 2. Color filters. An additional stimulus in such movies can be color filters used during video editing to activate specific neural networks through manipulation of visual excitations. Those may be colored, monochromatic, e.g. red, green, black and white, negative frames, or special animation inserts that create visual contrasts, activating a viewer's selective attention and enhancing neural sensory integration, which amplifies the subconscious influence. For example, when a background footage is created, certain inverted visual stimuli may be used in a series of violent video shots. That's because a colored image of a certain object can evoke positive emotions, empathy, feelings of empowerment, and freedom. However, if the same object is depicted in inverted colors and embedded into an appropriate footage, it can subconsciously appear ominous, evoke negative emotions, and block empathy. 3. Sound effects. Sound effects serve the same purpose as video inserts by activating specific brain regions, involving subconscious commands to act and changing a person's subsequent behavior. In such films, you can encounter sounds resembling a rattlesnake, wild animal cries, and other alarming sounds. The detrimental use of such auditory stimuli for manipulative purposes is mentioned in the Impact documentary, particularly in the part dedicated to the Waco siege, where it was described in detail how, under the guidance of Igor Smirnov, a Russian expert in zombification of human psyche and behavior, such technologies were used for destructive purposes. A sense of being godlike. There are also movies that, similarly to the media publications described above, evoke a sense of being godlike in a viewer. Such films cultivate an idea that by killing, a shooter gains freedom, becomes immortal, lives eternally, or will live numerous lives. That there is no death for the shooter, and if while killing others he dies from a bullet, he will allegedly attain true freedom. In these kinds of films, the world is depicted as an imperfect and God-forsaken place. There is manipulation, that the world is illusory, and that killing is merely an integral part of it. It is asserted that all animals in nature prey on each other. Meanwhile, a shooter is portrayed as an evolutionarily advanced species, superior to ordinary humans who are compared to apes, and he has the right to exterminate all species. Screenwriters usually justify the actions of a shooter, claiming that deep inside every person there resides a demon, and that all people deserve to be killed because of their sins. A shooter is portrayed as a messenger of fate, liberating others from their suffering and sins. A murder is presented not as an act of violence, but as an act of providence and a virtuous deed allowing a shooter to feel like he is in paradise and truly taste the thrill of life. The moment when a shooter realizes his purpose to kill is presented as the highest enlightenment worth 1,000 prayers. Such movies instill a belief that a shooter is born to be a murderer, that violence is inherent in his blood, his destiny, and mission. They showcase an extremely dangerous model of behavior, and while implementing it, a teenager imitates the main characters, imagining himself as godlike, elevating himself above the mortals around him, reveling in his own power, and believing he has the right to take the lives of other kids. Double-layered meanings. Attention should be paid to films about shooters with double-layered meanings. This technique simultaneously layers a video plot or an emotional narrative about violence, hatred, pain, and suffering on top of words or images that symbolize the brightest feelings and images for a human. While watching such a film, a viewer experiences deep cognitive dissonance, and their subconsciousness perceives the overall violent context and inclines them towards violent actions. For example, there might be a scene where teenagers, feeling anger and a sense of injustice, express hatred towards their father and voice a desire to kill him for restricting their personal freedom. This triggers a similar feeling of injustice in a viewer's subconsciousness towards his parents, recollections of all his past grievances, and a desire to take revenge on his tormentors. Simultaneously, a sweet video fragment is shown on the screen with an elderly man who is happy and smiling while being gently and lovingly stroked on the face. This subconsciously evokes extremely warm feelings in a viewer. Such double-layered meanings cause deep internal contradictions, and in combination with the overall plot, help to overshadow positive feelings with negative ones. Following this scene, the movie characters usually proceed to kill their parents. It is worth examining this example in more detail, as it highlights another important aspect with severe consequences. In such plots, teenagers are instilled with an idea that their parents are the only obstacle to their freedom and must be eliminated. Parents are portrayed as unjust, heartless, and cruel tormentors who deserve retribution. Later on, after the crime is committed, a shooter is shown experiencing feelings of freedom, joy, happiness, and complete impunity. This moment is presented as the beginning of a new chapter in the shooter's life. Consequently, the shooter commits brutal murders and gains significant media attention worldwide. From a psychological standpoint, there is another important explanation for this plot. Every child subconsciously associates their parents with conscience. A shooter understands that the only eyes he will be ashamed to look into after committing murder are those of his parents. Their eyes are a mirror of his inner conscience, evoking strong feelings of guilt and shame for his actions. Therefore, being programmed by the puzzle coding method, a teenager often tries to eliminate the source of activation of his conscience so as to commit crimes in the future with no remorse. This is precisely why geographic regions influenced by waves of informational coding experience surges in violence, family murders, and street killings committed by teenagers. A teenager thus steps over his conscience, and these kinds of cases were mentioned earlier in this article. If all the information pieces of the puzzle come together in a potential shooter, he completes the program embedded in his subconsciousness by killing random passers-by or his own parents, and then committing a mass shooting at school. However, most kids stop at the stage of killing their family members or committing street murders due to incomplete informational coding or missing puzzle pieces. Subsequently, when bipolar disorder dissipates and their mental state normalizes, they begin to feel fear over their actions and the resulting consequences. In these types of movies, you can also hear key phrases like, "Love is the most important thing," or "Only love can kill a demon." It is asserted that a shooter has just now learned to truly love, and that the greatest value in this world is the value of life. However, at the same time, the plot revolves around ruthless mass murders committed by the shooter, creating an impression that being a killer is cool. Additionally, such films emphasize that the shooter is aware of what is right and wrong, but consciously chooses the wrong side. Alternatively, a shooter might express being torn between extremes of light and darkness, yet in practice, he chooses the dark side. Mass media. There are movies designed not only to influence shooters, but also to target representatives of mass media and law enforcement. They contain a hidden message for the media. The more crimes occur, the more captivating stories they will have for their platforms and channels. News about criminals is presented as major events in television or press history, which can be turned into significant and popular shows. An idea is instilled that journalists and everyone involved in publishing stories about shooters will become national heroes. Their careers will be boosted, and they will become highly paid and sought-after professionals. In a way, such films even provide an instructional guide for media representatives. An idea is implanted that they need to frequently publish stories about shooters to keep the topic relevant. It is emphasized that the more repeated publications, the better. The alleged key is to craft the narrative properly and to create suspense, making people eagerly await new stories and follow the developments. It is suggested to create strikingly colorful covers with attractive images of the shooters and intriguing headlines to capture as much attention as possible. It is stressed that events should be described in great detail, adding more and more of them in every publication. At the same time, these kinds of movies provide examples of how to discredit law enforcement and the current government. They create fertile ground for active engagement of journalists by featuring lawbreakers who collaborate with the media in creating their stories. The films also demonstrate tense situations for media representatives, showing that if they fail to cover news about shooters, they will face significant problems, potentially leading to their dismissal. In such movies, law enforcement officers are depicted as helpless and incapable of controlling the situation. The storyline portrays them as having to pander to the media, despite discrediting publications about the police and other law enforcement agencies. Otherwise, they would encounter serious problems. It is shown that police officers treat young killers as cool, smart, and cunning, and they even express sympathy for them. In some cases, plots become absurd, with police officers impressed by the shooters and asking them for selfies and autographs when they meet them. For teenagers, the plot is constructed in such a way that they can commit crimes unimpeded, with no one, even the police, being able to stop them. The more massive a shooter's crime is, the more media coverage it gets, leading to increased popularity. These films overtly glorify criminals, showing entire groups of their young fans in different countries. A killer becomes the most popular and talked about person, with everyone wanting to interview them to create captivating content with lots of views. Shooters are compared to the world's most famous stars at the peak of their popularity, admired and envied by millions of people. Often, movie plots include examples of murders of famous individuals committed by the main characters, causing a significant media stir and elevating the shooters to a new level of fame. Canvas of the puzzle coding method. Imagine there are already movies created using all these techniques combined together. Such movies do exist. They are cult favorites and very popular among the younger generation. You get really horrified when realizing that such films are now openly accessible. They serve as a ready canvas for further layering of informational coding puzzles. What happens to the subconsciousness of a child who watches such a film? This is indeed direct manipulation, hiding extremely dangerous and terrifying psychological weapons behind a bright and colorful plot, turning an ordinary child into a bio-robot ready to kill innocent children. Why are these movies so influential, and why do they spawn a series of youth crimes? How did the screenwriters and directors come to know these methods? That's far from being a coincidence because all elements of such a film are thoroughly calibrated, perfectly placed, and fully aligned with methods of subconscious manipulation. If you carefully study biographies of the creators of such movies, it becomes clear who they were associated with and what goals they pursued. The trail of investigation in these cases ultimately leads to representatives of anti-cult organizations, or those who are behind them. For sensible people, such films produce a shocking and alarming impression. They raise a question. What kind of psyche do those films target? Films of this kind are precisely aimed not at a sick mind, but at a healthy one, with the intent to corrupt it. A teenager who watches such a movie only lacks a few more informational pieces put together in his subconsciousness to make a decision to commit mass shooting at school. Nowadays, there are a lot of children with normal psyche who are yet prone to crime, and unfortunately, representatives of anti-cultism exploit that by creating such video materials. These films capture a child's attention and give them a complete conscious and subconscious understanding of why they should commit mass murder. As a result, normal children end up committing crimes. Some experts in psychology and criminology claim that the tendency toward cruelty and violence is inherent in school shooters from the start. However, a deeper analysis of the biographies of those shooters reveals a completely different picture. Most of them had no signs of mental disorders in the past, and were ordinary children living normal lives. Many excelled in school, participated in sports, played games like all other kids, and had their own achievements. They had the same desires and dreams as most of their peers. Dreams of becoming successful like famous people, building a business, and having a bright future. But suddenly, after watching coding movies, reading articles, books or social media posts, or attending lectures that involve hidden informational coding, those teenagers develop an intrusive thought to become significant by committing murder. In an instant, normal kids with normal psyches begin secretly planning a school attack, eventually committing mass murder, and taking the lives of innocent children. It's important to note that the subconscious coding information affects not only potential shooters, but many other students in a given school. Many contemplate and mentally plan terror attacks. However, after a real school shooting, few voluntarily admit that they too had been planning, or at least considering such an act. These kinds of thoughts often become particularly intrusive before the crime. Generally, students may reluctantly share these thoughts in confidential conversations, but mostly try to hide them. After the crime, when the subconscious program has been executed and bipolar disorder disappears, many shooters find themselves in a state of shock. They cannot logically explain their own actions and often provide incoherent excuses in an attempt to rationalize what has happened. The root of the problem lies in the information space that is currently poorly controlled and is filled with scoundrels who manipulate people's subconscious minds for their purposes. Their information weapons are worse than bombs, since they affect the subconsciousness of millions of people with terrifying consequences for the lives of billions. School shootings are a controlled process. All the aforementioned methods of subconscious informational coding suggest that school shootings are a controlled process. Are shooters to blame in this case? Yes, they committed murder. However, they acted like remotely controlled robots. When we steer a remote control toy car and accidentally break our mother's favorite floor vase, who is to blame? The car or the person controlling it? Who should be held responsible? To our mother, the answer is clear. She immediately punishes the person who was controlling the car. So why does the government punish the car instead of the one who controlled it? As a matter of fact, in the case of school shootings, a child who kills other children is as much a victim as those he kills. He became a victim of hidden impact from which no one in the world is currently protected. He is merely a tool in the hands of others who skillfully manipulate not just his conscious mind, but also his subconsciousness that directs the shooter's actions to achieve their goals. Meanwhile, they operate through the information space. Articles on the issue of school shootings often emphasize that the police and authorities fail to protect children, but what can they do to stop school shootings with the methods available to them? By the time the police arrive at the crime scene, many children may already be wounded or dead. Should they physically guard every student in all educational institutions? Or should they install as many metal detectors as possible in schools? Simply confiscating firearms or knives is not enough because other means, such as chemical weapons, will remain. The problem is not with the weapons themselves, but with the existence of methods of hidden manipulation of people. School shootings are a result of an uncontrolled information space. Yet, are journalists to blame in this case? Most of them unknowingly write their articles based on a text provided by their clients, which already contains manipulative implants. Moreover, there are journalists who are recruited by anti-cultists and who, under the guise of their press credentials, control the media and consciously carry out informational terror attacks. Those journalists directly work for anti-cult organizations, and in doing so, they feel godlike, ruling other people's lives. Yes, they are accomplices in organizing informational acts of terrorism and deliberately carry them out, but they are merely executors. Who, then, is the mastermind? Who provided those journalists with ready-to-publish information? Behind those journalists stands an entire laboratory of specialists from global anti-cultism, who study the consciousness and interests of children in the region where they plan for a school shooting to occur. Those specialists can penetrate a person's subconscious mind through information and alter their behavior. They understand the mechanisms behind desires and know how certain stimuli can be interpreted by one's subconsciousness in a way that benefits them. The use of their methods of subconscious coding ultimately leads to suppression of freedom and democracy. Look at how much democracy has weakened globally over the past 30 years. Even if we consider the issue of school shootings only, how many mass protests have occurred due to this problem, criticizing law enforcement and the current government? How many laws have already been amended, ultimately leading to the restriction of democratic freedoms? This is exactly what anti-cultists aim for: to artificially incite discontent among the population, so they can then introduce their own laws, replace current government representatives with their agents, and, most importantly, achieve destabilization, disorder, and panic in society, provoking division and conflict. Are the authorities to blame for not being able to address these issues, including school shootings, effectively if they have no idea of the manipulation methods used by global anti-cultists? Again, who is behind the shooters targeting government officials? As you may have noticed, it has recently become a trend among shooters to target politicians. Given the current global situation, it is highly advantageous for representatives of anti-cultism to provoke such crimes. They don't care about the ideology of targeted politicians or any other factors. What matters to them is the resonance the event will create and its impact on destabilizing society, so they can later exploit the situation to achieve their own goals. As for the shooters who target politicians, they are just as much victims of subconscious psychological manipulation through the puzzle coding method as the shooters in schools. They are victims just like the politicians they target, the children in school shootings, and all people subjected to hidden manipulations and informational attacks in the media. All these individuals are in the crosshairs of global anti-cultists whose plans include destruction of democracy and attainment of total power worldwide. So, who should be held accountable to the public now? Shooters, journalists, police, government officials, or those who manipulate them all? One can understand parents who have lost their children during school shootings and experience immense grief. But how are they better than the parents of the shooters in this case? Would they be able to protect their children from the manipulative informational waves of coding that penetrate the depths of human subconsciousness? Under such conditions, any child could become a shooter. And in this situation, every person is a victim of informational terrorism and falls under the hidden influence of global anti-cultists. So, who should be punished and who should be pardoned? As long as there are those interested in carrying out terrorist attacks, and they have access to corrupt media that are not properly controlled, people will continue to suffer, and democracy will continue to crumble worldwide. That's what is valuable about the Impact documentary, and the years-long investigation that Egon Chalakian spoke about in his video, Undeclared War. America is under attack. They have shed light on the origins of many modern societal problems, revealed the existence of global anti-cultism, and today this has become known to the public. Why is it so important to openly discuss the identified methods of subconscious informational coding as they are and explain how they are used? Because the truth, in this case, is the best tool for protecting children. Regarding the problem of school shootings, parents and their children need to be aware of the real threat to their lives. Of course, the process of restoring order will not be quick. But at least now, knowing the truth, parents can take appropriate measures to prevent terrible crimes if they notice signs such as bipolar disorder in their children. Shield. In order to permanently eliminate the hidden influence of global anti-cultists on people's subconscious, the information space must be fully controlled by artificial intelligence. Unlike humans, AI can process vast amounts of information instantaneously. As practice has shown, humans can be bribed, persuaded, or coerced through blackmail to act in a certain way. This is impossible with artificial intelligence. It doesn't accept bribes. AI will function in the information space like an antivirus on a computer. Any informational content entering this space must pass through it. All articles, news stories, films, and social media publications must undergo moderation before being made publicly accessible in the information space. All educational institutions and classrooms should be equipped with special cameras connected to a security system to ensure that no one can ever use technologies of manipulating children's consciousness and subconsciousness and implant harmful programs. The learning process should be monitored online. The Impact documentary details the importance of establishing an organization shield that will develop AI-based technology to safeguard order in the information space. This measure will prevent anyone from secretly manipulating the masses for destructive purposes and significantly hinder the activities of global anti-cultism. By eradicating the concept of anti-cultism and ensuring total protection of our information space from malicious zombifying programs, many societal problems including terrorism and school shootings will disappear. All secrets eventually come to light. The truth voiced today can be heard by those who will be responsible for saving the lives of children tomorrow. When society unites in protecting children's lives and its own consciousness from harmful programs, it will have a future.